we are going to work with patterns and textures. So this is metal foil that we're going to use for our tooling process so that we can feel our texture. Before we begin working with that, we're going to take a piece of paper and you're going to just fill it with patterns that might show how something feels, so texturized patterns. Okay, once I have my paper filled, I'm going to get a piece of foil and I'm going to put it underneath. I can flip over and the foil should just be slightly smaller than the paper so we can tape it in place. We don't want it to move and budge as we are working with metal tooling. So a piece of tape in each corner is fine. Then I just have a few pieces of paper. You can use a folder, something, newspaper, so that you have a bit of padding or underneath to press into so that your textures will go into the metal. Then I work with a pencil. Notice this pencil is not very sharp. I don't need a sharp edge. A dull edge is going to be much better for this. And I'm going to press as I trace all of my lines. And the idea is to embed these into that metal. And when I'm done, we should hopefully be able to flip this over and see all of my lines appear in my metal. So notice here, if I turn this over, you can now see those wavy lines. So I'm going to continue doing this until all of my textures are pressed in. Okay, when you're all done tracing everything, you're going to flip it over. You saw that as I was working, I was doing that to check areas. So if any areas don't seem like they've embedded well enough, I can't feel them, I can't see the lines, and I want to turn my paper back over and go ahead and trace them again. These I don't think worked out all that well. So I can come in and I want to really work on some of those lines that didn't seem to show up for me. So that seems a little bit better there. Then my final step, or next step I should say, is removing my paper And I'm gonna work with Sharpies and I can add color to my foil. Okay, so there we are. I'm going to gently remove my tape. Trying not to bend my foil. The more I bend it and wrinkle it, the more my textures will be impaired. So here it is, the right side up, the way that I traced it. I actually want to work with it upside down so that those lines that I drew are standing up or outwards. And then I can begin working with Sharpie and adding color to emphasize those lines. I like to color between my spaces so that those metal lines stand out. All right, now, as we are coloring and as you are finishing up, a couple things to keep in mind. Sharpie, even though it's a permanent marker, it does not dry immediately on the metal, so you want to work away from other areas. So I just finished this area, now I'm coming back over here. Otherwise, if I set my hand on top of it, I'm going to be picking up all of the Sharpie on my hand, and I'm going to start to smear my markers. So I want to kind of think about watercolor tips and don't color next to an area that I just finished so that I'm not printing it onto my skin or smearing my colors on my project. The other thing is that as you are coloring, you can change the amount of texture that has been created in your metal. So in the end, I might need to come back, turn it over, and recreate some of those textures or add them back in. Because even as I color with my Sharpie, if I'm coloring really hard, I can flatten those lines that I had created initially. So I want to try to avoid coloring on top of them. So I'm really trying to go around those lines. But if I flatten them, I can always flip it over and retrace them from the back side so that those textures are standing out. Okay, I think this side looks pretty good. I can also come in and touch areas up, like in here, if I've got some spots that didn't really get colored that are bothering me. Now that it's dry, I can kind of touch those little areas up and make those spaces more solid. Again, I can turn this over. If there's any area where I feel like the lines aren't popping out, I can trace them. I can use a pencil or a pen, sometimes for some of these finer areas. If they're not standing out the way I like, then I like to press in a pen. It gives it a really kind of sharp line when you outline it with the pen, cleans them up, and makes them more visible from the front side of my paper. All right, I think I fixed those two that were bothering me up. Turn it over. With this, I'm finished, and if I choose, I can get a black paper, mat my work so that this stands out, or I can leave it as is. I hope you had fun working with the metal and creating textures and patterns in your designs.